Okay. Okay. I need you to sit down for this one. I am not joking. I need you to put your phone down, close whatever other tab you have open, get comfortable, because what I'm about to tell you is the kind of story that you are going to be talking about for weeks. This is the kind of story where the moment I finished reading about it, I had to just sit there for a full minute and stare at the wall because I genuinely could not process the level of audacity, the level of pettiness, the level of, and I say this with all the love and respect that this situation does not deserve, absolute, unhinged, spectacular chaos that one single human being managed to create for himself while also somehow being one of the greatest basketball players who has ever lived. We are talking about Kevin Durant. We are talking about burner accounts. We are talking about a man who gets paid $47 million dollars a year, deciding that the best use of his time was to create fake Instagram accounts to talk trash about his own teammates, not a rival, not a hater, not some random fan account that was bothering him, the people he shares a locker room with, the people he practices with every single day, the people who are supposed to be his brothers, his partners, his team, those people. Kevin Durant allegedly sat down, created a secondary account, and started anonymously dragging them online like a bored teenager with a Wi-Fi connection and too much free time. And the best part, the absolute best part, this is not even the first time he has done this, not even close. But we are going to get to that because trust me, the history of Kevin Durant and his internet behavior is its own entire masterclass in how to be incredibly talented and somehow still make every situation worse for yourself. But we are not starting there. We are starting with Houston. We are starting with 2026. We are starting with the freshest, hottest, most unhinged chapter of the Kevin Durant Chaos Chronicles. And then we are going to go all the way back and connect the dots in a way that is going to make your jaw drop. So buckle up because this is going to be a long one. And I promise you that the part you think is the craziest part is not the craziest part. The craziest part comes later. And the part after that is even crazier. So if you're new here, welcome. Hit subscribe because you clearly found the right channel at the right time. And if you've been here before, you already know that we do not do quick summaries. We do not do 2-minute recaps. We do the full story, every detail, every reaction, every layer, because that's the only way to truly understand how we got here. Let's start at the beginning. Well, not the very beginning. We'll get to the very beginning, but let's start with Houston because that's where the most recent fire started. And you need to understand the fire before you can understand why the whole house has been gasoline soaked for years. Kevin Durant signed with the Houston Rockets ahead of the 2025 to 26 season. And look, on paper, I want to be fair here. I genuinely want to try to be fair for about 30 seconds before I lose all objectivity. On paper, this made a kind of sense. The Rockets had been building something. Alperen Sengun had turned into a legitimate all-star, this big, soft-handed, incredibly skilled center from Turkey who could score from anywhere and pass like a point guard. Jalen Green had finally started showing flashes of the explosive two-guard they drafted him to be. Amen Thompson was becoming a defensive force, a guy who could guard multiple positions and bring energy every single night. The pieces were there, the youth was there, the potential was undeniable. And Kevin Durant, 37 years old, 2 championship rings, one of the top 5 scorers in the history of the sport. Kevin Durant was supposed to be the missing piece, the veteran presence, the guy who shows the young guys how it's done, the guy who walks into the gym and immediately elevates the entire organization just by being there. That was the pitch. That was the plan. The Rockets sold it. KD bought into it, or at least acted like he did. And for about the first month of the season, things looked like they might actually work. But here's what you need to know about Kevin Durant. And I say this as someone who has watched every single development of his career with the kind of intense, almost anthropological fascination that you normally reserve for nature documentaries. Kevin Durant has never in his adult professional life been able to just exist in an environment without eventually finding something to be unhappy about. And I do not say that to be cruel. I say it because it is a documented, observable, repeatedly confirmed pattern of behavior that is impossible to ignore at this point if you are paying attention. It started slowly, the way it always does with him. There were little whispers coming out of Houston by midseason, reports that KD was frustrated with the pace of play, reports that he felt like the offense wasn't being run through him enough in certain situations, reports that there was some tension around rotation decisions, around who was getting minutes in crucial moments, around the fundamental question of whose team this actually was. And again, some of that is normal. Some of that is just what happens when you bring a player of his caliber into a young team's ecosystem. There's always an adjustment period. There's always friction when 2 different basketball cultures have to figure out how to coexist. But then something happened that crossed every possible line. Something so petty, so bizarre, so completely disconnected from how a grown adult professional athlete is supposed to handle frustration that when the story broke, people genuinely thought it was fake, a joke, a troll, something made up by a satirical account that got screenshot and shared without context. It was not fake. It was very, very real. Kevin Durant, again, $47 million a year, had allegedly been using a secondary Instagram account to post comments and engage with content that was critical of his own teammates, and not just passive engagement, not just liking a post that was already out there. Active, deliberate, targeted engagement, seeking out articles and videos that were questioning Jalen Green's decision making, finding posts that were questioning whether Alperen Sengun was tough enough for playoff basketball, amplifying the criticism, adding fuel to it from the inside, from within the building, from a man who is supposed to be their leader. And I need you to really sit with that for a second before we go further, because I think it's easy to hear that and to kind of process it abstractly, like, oh, that's bad, that's unprofessional, moving on. No, stop. Think about what that actually means. Think about what it means for Jalen Green, who grew up idolizing Kevin Durant, who has cited him in interviews as one of his inspirations, who went to sleep as a kid dreaming about being the kind of player that KD is. And then he comes to the NBA, he gets to play alongside his hero, and somewhere in the back of his mind, there's a fake account posting things like Green can't handle the moment and he disappears when it counts. And that fake account is allegedly Kevin Durant, the person he looked up to, the person who was supposed to be in his corner. Can you even imagine? Can you imagine the psychological damage of that? If you're Jalen Green, can you imagine looking across the practice court at the man who is supposed to be your mentor, your elder statesman, your example of what greatness looks like, and knowing, or at least strongly suspecting, that he has been taking shots at you behind a fake account like a jealous ex-partner who can't move on? That is not a locker room issue. That is not tension between teammates. That is a betrayal. That is the kind of thing that changes the way you trust people for years. But wait. Because before we get into all of that, and before we get into the teammates and the Rockets and the organizational fallout and all of the incredible chaos that followed, I need to back up and tell you how this account was actually discovered, because the discovery story is almost as wild as the account itself. And if you're watching this and thinking, okay, but how do you actually prove it was him? That is exactly the right question. And the answer is going to either make you respect the investigation or make you cackle at Kevin Durant's complete failure to cover his tracks, depending on your mood. First, you should know that this is apparently not Kevin Durant's first rodeo with fake accounts, not even slightly. But again, we are going to get to the history in a minute, because I want you to have the full context of Houston first. The full, fresh, current disaster needs to be established before we go back in time and realize that this is actually a 15-year pattern of behavior that everyone has been giving him passes on. The account was allegedly identified through a combination of factors that, when you put them together, paint a picture of someone who was very confident they would not get caught, and turned out to be very wrong about that. The first factor was the writing style. Now, Kevin Durant is known for having a very specific, very recognizable way of expressing himself online. And if you've ever seen him respond to people on social media, and we will discuss his greatest hits in a moment, you know that he has certain phrases, certain rhythms, certain ways of constructing sentences that are pretty distinctly his. And when people who covered the Rockets started noticing that a particular account in the comments of NBA content sounded an awful lot like Kevin Durant, trying to sound like someone who wasn't Kevin Durant, it raised some eyebrows. The second factor was more technical. Reports indicated that a member of the Rockets staff, and the details here are a bit murky, and because sources have been careful about how much they've confirmed, noticed some digital patterns connecting the account to activity associated with Durant's known devices or accounts. The specifics of how exactly that determination was made have not been fully reported, and we are not going to speculate beyond what's been confirmed. But the end result was that multiple credible NBA reporters, not just random social media accounts, not just fan speculation, but actual journalists with real sourcing, started reporting that this account was connected to Durant. And then the screenshots started circulating, and that was when the story went completely nuclear. If you weren't online the day those screenshots started spreading, let me paint you a picture of what it looked like. It was a Tuesday, and NBA Twitter, or NBA X, I guess, whatever we're calling it, went from normal playoffs discussion to absolute pandemonium within about 90 minutes. The first screenshots were posted by a smaller account, then picked up by a mid-sized sports reporter, then retweeted by someone with a larger following, and within 2 hours, every major sports media account in the country was either reporting on it, reacting to it, or doing that infuriating thing where they say, "We cannot confirm these screenshots," while simultaneously embedding them in their articles so you can read every single word. The comments in the screenshots were pointed, they were specific. They weren't vague criticisms like the team chemistry is off. They were targeted observations about individual players' performances in specific games, the kind of detail that you only have if you are inside the situation. There was a comment about a specific fourth quarter possession in a game against a Western Conference opponent where Jalen Green had a turnover at a critical moment. And the account's comment essentially said this was why Green wasn't ready for big moments. There was commentary about Sengun's performance against physical centers, suggesting he got pushed around too easily. There were insinuations that the team's young core was limiting what KD could accomplish. And again, that the receipts are the receipts. The language matched, the knowledge was insider level, and the timing of the account's activity correlated with things that were happening around the Rockets in ways that made that this is just a coincidence explanation very difficult to sustain. Kevin Durant's initial public response was, and this is so perfectly on brand for him that it almost seems scripted, complete silence followed by a carefully worded statement that didn't actually deny anything with any specificity. There was no, "that is not my account." There was no, "I did not write those comments." There was a statement from someone in his camp that was essentially a masterpiece of saying words while communicating nothing. The kind of statement that corporate lawyers write when they need to appear to be responding while actually preserving every possible option, which, if you have been paying attention to how Kevin Durant handles controversy for the last 15 years, is extremely familiar territory. But here's where it gets even better. And I told you it was going to get better because the silence and the non-denial were actually not even the most damaging part of KD's response to the situation. The most damaging part was what happened next in the locker room. Because while Durant was saying nothing publicly, the people who actually had to live with the fallout of this story, his teammates, his coaches, the entire Rockets organization, were very much not doing nothing. They were processing, they were having conversations, and from everything that has come out in the weeks since, those conversations were not pretty. Let me tell you about the locker room dynamics that reportedly developed in the aftermath of the screenshots, because this is where the story stops being about social media stupidity and starts being about real human consequences, real damage to real relationships between real people who had to figure out how to share a basketball court with each other after all of this. Jalen Green, by multiple accounts, was devastated, not angry. Devastated. There's a difference, and it matters. Anger is something you can channel. Anger can actually motivate you, can make you go out and try to prove someone wrong. Devastation is something different. Devastation is when something fundamentally shifts in how you see a person you trusted, and you cannot unshift it. And the reports coming out of the Rockets locker room suggested that Green was operating in that second category. He had looked up to Durant his whole career. He had been excited to be on the same team. He had believed that being around someone at KD's level would accelerate his development in ways that nothing else could. And then this happened. There were reports that Green had multiple conversations with members of the coaching staff about the situation, that he wasn't sure how to process it, that he was asking questions that none of them could really answer, like, why would he do this and what am I supposed to do now? Questions that are incredibly human and incredibly reasonable given the circumstances, and also completely unanswerable in any satisfying way. And I want to acknowledge here, because I think it's important, that Jalen Green is 24 years old. He's a kid, relatively speaking, in the context of his career. He was supposed to be in the part of his professional development where he's being mentored and guided and built up, not the part where he's dealing with the psychological aftermath of allegedly being publicly undermined by the veteran he was supposed to learn from. The fact that he was asked to navigate that situation while also trying to perform in a playoff run speaks to a level of resilience that he deserves a lot more credit for than he's gotten. Alperen Sengun's reaction was reportedly different but equally complicated. Sengun is, by all accounts, one of the more internally grounded personalities in the Rockets locker room, a thoughtful, internationally experienced player who came up through European basketball and has a certain maturity about him that doesn't always make the highlights, but shows up in how he carries himself in difficult situations. But even Sengun, according to people close to the team, was not unaffected. There's something uniquely demoralizing about discovering that a teammate you respected has been questioning your toughness behind your back, even if it's in the form of anonymous internet comments rather than a direct confrontation, maybe especially if it's in that form. because at least a direct confrontation is something you can respond to, something you can address face to face. Anonymous sniping from someone who smiles at you in the gym every day is a different kind of wound. And then there's the coaching staff, which found itself in one of the most genuinely impossible positions I think a coaching staff can find itself in during a playoff run, because here's their situation. They have a superstar who is allegedly the source of significant locker room damage. They are in the middle of a playoff series that they need to win. They cannot bench the superstar because they need his scoring. They cannot publicly address the situation because nothing has been officially confirmed. They cannot ignore the situation because their players are clearly affected by it. And they have to somehow get everybody to play together at the highest possible level while all of this is happening underneath the surface. How do you give a pregame speech in that environment? How do you talk about trust, about playing for each other, about having each other's backs? How do you say any of that with a straight face when there's a significant possibility that one of the people in the room has been violating exactly those values via fake Instagram? The answer is that you can't, not really. You do your best. You focus on basketball. You try to compartmentalize. But the thing about locker room damage is that it does not stay compartmentalized. It leaks into everything. It shows up in the subtle hesitation before a pass. It shows up in the slight withdrawal of effort on a play where somebody else has the ball. It shows up in the collective psychic weight of a team that is no longer quite sure it can trust itself. And you want to know what the Rockets' postseason looked like? They were eliminated in the first round by the Los Angeles Lakers, a Lakers team that was beatable. A series that, by metrics, and by the way the regular season had gone, should not have been a foregone conclusion. A series that the Rockets, in a healthy environment, had a real shot in. They lost it. And while there were basketball reasons for that loss, LeBron James had a vintage, magnificent series. The Lakers were well coached. Credit where it's due. You cannot look at everything that was happening beneath the surface and tell me it didn't matter. You cannot tell me that a team carrying that weight into a playoff series performs at the same level as a team that's unified and trusting and genuinely playing for each other. So that's the Houston chapter, at least as far as we currently know it. But here's the thing. Here's the part I've been building toward. Here's why this story is not just about a bad Instagram decision or even about a team's playoff run being compromised. Here's why this is a story about a pattern, a deep, long-running, extensively documented pattern of behavior that tells us something important about Kevin Durant and about the gap between how his talent is discussed and how his character has actually manifested over the course of his career. So I need you to stay with me. I know we've been at this for a while already, but we are about to go back in time. And what you're going to see when we go back in time is going to reframe everything you thought you knew about this story, because this isn't new. This isn't Kevin Durant having an off year and making a bad decision. This is Kevin Durant being Kevin Durant in the most specific and revealing sense of that phrase. And if you're enjoying this so far, if this is exactly the kind of deep dive, no shortcuts, full story content you've been looking for, hit that subscribe button right now, seriously, because we do this every single time something worth talking about happens. And right now, in these 2026 playoffs, something worth talking about is happening almost every night. Let's go back. Let's go back to 2017, because that is ground zero. That is where the record begins, even though, and I want you to file this away because we'll come back to it, even though there are people who knew Kevin Durant during his OKC years who will tell you in not very subtle terms that this tendency was visible long before 2017, long before the world knew to look for it. The year is 2017. Kevin Durant has just done the most controversial thing any star player had done in the modern NBA era. He left Oklahoma City, where he spent 9 seasons, where he built his career, where he was supposed to be the franchise cornerstone for as long as he wanted to be, and he joined the Golden State Warriors. The Warriors, who had literally just beaten his Oklahoma City team in the conference finals. The Warriors, who already had Steph Curry and Klay Thompson and Draymond Green and had just set the record for wins in an NBA season. He joined them. Now, I am not here to relitigate the ethics of that decision. People can do what they want in free agency. That's how the system works. Players have the right to choose where they play, and Kevin Durant had every legal and contractual right to sign with Golden State. But the reaction to that decision was intense, historically intense. The criticism was loud, it was sustained, And for someone with Kevin Durant's documented emotional relationship with public perception, it was clearly hitting differently than he was letting on, because what happened next revealed something that, in retrospect, should have been a much bigger story than it was at the time. It was discovered through one of the most perfect, most embarrassing, most you had one job moments in social media history, that Kevin Durant had been using multiple fake Twitter accounts to defend himself online, not just to post things, to have actual conversations, full back and forth exchanges, responses to criticism, defenses of his decision to leave OKC, arguments with fans, the whole production. And the way it was discovered was so spectacularly incompetent that it would be funny if it wasn't so revealing. Durant was responding to a fan who was criticizing him from one of his fake accounts. We'll call it Burner Account Classic, because at this point, we need to distinguish it from the Houston situation. And he responded to the fan by defending Kevin Durant in the third person, which is already a little suspicious in terms of why does this random account care so much about defending KD specifically? But then, in what can only be described as a moment that the internet gods created specifically to teach all of us a lesson about hubris, he accidentally posted the response from his main account, not the burner, the main one, with his name on it, with his face on it, with his 30 million followers on it. He defended himself in the third person from his own verified main account. The secondhand embarrassment I feel on his behalf, just thinking about it, is genuinely physical. He literally forgot to switch accounts. He was so deep in the game of pretending to be someone else defending Kevin Durant that he lost track of which Kevin Durant account he was operating from. The tweets were incredible. In one of them, and this is publicly reported, these were screenshotted and preserved for all of internet history, the account wrote something to the effect of defending KD's decision to leave OKC, using language like he wasn't with us through the process in reference to himself, referring to Kevin Durant as he while being Kevin Durant, and doing it from Kevin Durant's own verified Twitter account. When confronted about it, and to his very minor credit, he did not try to fully deny it, which at that point would have been completely pointless. Durant acknowledged that it was him. He called it a mistake. He said he was in a weird headspace. He apologized in the way that people apologize when they've been fully caught and have no other option. And then the sports media mostly moved on, treated it as a quirky, kind of endearing moment of relatable human behavior, laughed about it warmly, filed it under even superstars are just people, and went back to talking about the Warriors dynasty. And that response from the media, that collective decision to chuckle and move on, is something I want to come back to, because I think it set a precedent. I think it established a pattern of response to Kevin Durant's behavior that has allowed that behavior to continue and escalate for years without the kind of accountability that would have been applied to literally any other player in the league. But we'll get to that. Stay with me. The point right now is 2017, fake accounts. Burner Twitter, getting caught in the most embarrassing way possible, apologizing, moving on. You would genuinely think that the experience of being caught, the experience of the global humiliation of accidentally posting from your main account while pretending to be someone else defending yourself would be sufficient deterrent to ever doing anything like that again. You would think that the lesson would be learned. You would think that a reasonable adult human being would look at that experience and say, okay, I am never doing that again. I am going to process my feelings about public criticism in literally any other way. But we are talking about Kevin Durant. And Kevin Durant does not always think the way you or I think. Kevin Durant, and I say this as someone who genuinely finds this fascinating from a psychological standpoint, seems to have a relationship with online criticism that is unlike anything I have seen in professional sports. Not just the fact that it affects him. Lots of people are affected by criticism. That's normal. But the specific, intense, consuming way that it seems to occupy his mental space, the way it follows him even when he is performing at an elite level, the way it apparently drives him to do things that directly contradict his own interests, that is something specific and worth examining. Because here's what's wild. Here's what makes the Kevin Durant story genuinely hard to wrap your head around. At the time of the 2017 Burner Twitter incident, Kevin Durant had just won the NBA championship with Golden State. He was the finals MVP. He had just delivered arguably the greatest individual performance in NBA finals history to that point. He was literally holding a trophy. He had proved every single critic wrong in the most definitive, undeniable way possible. The receipts were right there. The validation he was supposedly seeking was sitting in his hands in the form of a Larry O'Brien trophy. And he was still on fake Twitter accounts arguing with fans about whether leaving OKC was the right decision. Let that sink in. Championship rings in one hand, burner accounts in the other. That is the Kevin Durant paradox in its most concentrated form. And if you understand that, if you truly internalize what that tells you about how this man processes external validation and criticism, then nothing that happened in Houston is actually surprising. It's the same mechanism. It's the same pattern. It's the same fundamental inability to disengage from what people think about him, even when by any rational measure he should have nothing to prove. But before we get too deep into the psychological analysis, and we are going to get there, don't worry, we are absolutely going to talk about what this behavior actually means and what it says about Kevin Durant as a person and as a teammate. I want to walk you through the years between 2017 and now, because the Brooklyn era is its own magnificent disaster. And while it didn't feature a confirmed burner account situation, it has enough documented drama, enough reported behavior, enough general absolute chaos to fill several episodes on its own. And understanding Brooklyn is essential to understanding why Houston happened the way it happened. Kevin Durant left Golden State after the 2019 season. He had won 2 championships there. He had been the best player on both title teams, arguably the best player in the league during that stretch, and he left. He signed with the Brooklyn Nets in what was supposed to be the beginning of a new super team era in New York. Him and Kyrie Irving, 2 of the most talented players of their generation, coming together on the biggest stage in basketball. The city was losing its mind. The expectations were stratospheric. What followed was one of the most consistently, creatively chaotic stretches of franchise basketball in modern NBA history. And I want to be fair here. I genuinely want to be fair. I'm going to put in real effort. Not all of the chaos was Kevin Durant's fault. Some of it was very much Kyrie Irving's specific flavor of chaos, which is a whole different genre of drama that we might need to dedicate an entire separate episode to someday. The vaccine situation, the comments, the Astroworld tweet, the anti-Semitism controversy. Kyrie brought his own considerable drama to the Brooklyn experiment. That is acknowledged. But there is a version of the Brooklyn story that the Kevin Durant camp has worked very hard to establish, which is that KD was the responsible adult in the room, the professional who just wanted to play basketball and was constantly being derailed by circumstances beyond his control. And when you look at the actual timeline of events, when you look at what was actually reported by reporters who had sources inside that building, that version of the story starts to fall apart in some pretty significant ways. There were consistent reports throughout the Brooklyn years of information being strategically leaked to the media in ways that shaped narratives favorably for Durant's image, stories that framed him as the reasonable one, the committed one, the player who is being let down by the circus around him, stories that subtly pointed fingers at management, at Kyrie, at James Harden after he demanded a trade, at the general dysfunction of the organization. And look, some of those stories may have been completely accurate. Some of that dysfunction was real and demonstrable. But the pattern of how information was being shaped and released was noted by multiple reporters who covered that team, and it painted a picture of someone who was very actively concerned with managing how he was perceived in the middle of a situation that was going badly. There was also the Ben Simmons situation. Oh, the Ben Simmons situation. If you need a refresher, the Nets traded for Ben Simmons from Philadelphia in the James Harden deal. Simmons came to Brooklyn deeply scarred from his Philadelphia experience. The Sixers fans had been brutal to him. He had developed what appeared to be a genuine mental health crisis around basketball performance. He had not played in over a year. The Nets brought him in as a long-term piece, expecting him to eventually work his way back. He never played a single game for them before the Kevin Durant trade request. And the reporting around Simmons during the Brooklyn era included accounts of locker room dynamics that were not warm, accounts of a player who was struggling enormously, personally and professionally, in an environment that was not particularly equipped to support that kind of struggle. Multiple reports suggested the locker room culture in Brooklyn during that period was not one where vulnerability was welcomed or supported, which tells you something about the culture that the most powerful people in that locker room, Durant and Irving, were allowing or creating. I'm not saying Kevin Durant is directly responsible for Ben Simmons' mental health situation. That would be an overreach. But I am saying that the environment that allegedly existed in that Brooklyn locker room and the role that the team's leadership played or didn't play in shaping it is part of the Kevin Durant story that gets underreported because it doesn't have the dramatic clarity of a fake Instagram account. And then because the Brooklyn disaster needed a finale worthy of everything that preceded it, Kevin Durant asked to be traded. In the summer of 2022, he had already been through the Kyrie drama, the Harden trade demand, the Simmons situation, and now he sent a letter to ownership essentially saying, I want out. And in that letter, according to reports at the time, there was an extraordinary element. He reportedly gave the Nets an ultimatum that they choose between him staying and the head coach and general manager keeping their jobs. Let me say that again because I want to make sure it lands properly. Kevin Durant reportedly told the Brooklyn Nets ownership that they needed to choose between keeping their head coach and general manager or keeping Kevin Durant. He reportedly said one of them had to go. He reportedly gave them an ultimatum about organizational personnel, a player, telling ownership who they could and couldn't employ. And he did this from a position of, let's be honest, a recent first-round playoff exit and a season that had gone nowhere near as planned. The Nets, to their considerable credit, did not fire their coach and GM. They called the bluff. And then there were weeks of this extraordinary standoff where KD wanted out but couldn't find a trade that worked. And the Nets couldn't find a trade that gave them what they needed. And it just sat there being deeply uncomfortable for everyone involved until finally, eventually, KD agreed to stay for one more season, had a characteristically excellent individual year in terms of scoring, and was then traded to Phoenix in February 2023. And Phoenix is almost sad compared to the theatrical scale of Brooklyn. Phoenix was supposed to be simpler. Phoenix had Devin Booker, one of the best scoring guards in the league. They had Kevin Durant, one of the best scorers ever. The fit on paper was obvious. And for a stretch, it worked. There were games where Durant and Booker were doing things that seemed almost unfair. Two elite scorers operating in rhythm, creating mismatches all over the court. But then came the first round exit, came the off-court whispers about locker room tension, about KD's relationship with the coaching staff, about questions of fit and culture, and whether the Suns could build something sustainable around a player who seemed constitutionally incapable of fully committing to any single environment for any extended period. And then came Houston. I want to pause here because if you've been with me this whole time, you deserve a moment to breathe and also an acknowledgement. Yes, we are about to connect all of this back to the Houston burner account situation. And yes, the connection is going to make you see the 2026 story very differently than you might have seen it before we went on this historical journey. Because what happened in Houston is not a surprise when you look at the full arc. It is, in a very sad and frustrating way, the logical conclusion of a pattern that started at least as far back as 2017 and probably earlier. Here's the through line. Here's the thing that connects the fake Twitter in 2017 to the alleged fake Instagram in 2026. Kevin Durant has an extraordinary, persistent, seemingly unmanageable need to control the narrative around him, not just his public image. And lots of celebrities care about their public image. That's normal. But something more specific and more consuming than that, and need to have the last word, to rebut the criticism, to make sure that whatever story is being told about him is the story he would tell about himself. And when the legitimate tools available to him, press conferences, official statements, his verified social media presence, feel inadequate to that task, he has repeatedly, demonstrably reached for a different tool, the anonymous account. And here's what's so revealing about that choice, as opposed to other choices he could make. If Kevin Durant genuinely believed that his talent spoke for itself, he wouldn't need burner accounts. The scoreboard exists, the box scores exist, the rings exist. If he was truly comfortable with who he is and what he's accomplished, the criticism from fans, from media, from haters, from whoever would not have this kind of purchase on him. But it does. Clearly and demonstrably, it does. The criticism gets in, it gets under his skin, it occupies his mental space in a way that, based on the behavior, apparently cannot be discharged through normal channels. The choice to go anonymous, to create a fake account rather than address things directly, is particularly telling because anonymity is the tool of someone who wants the outcome of the engagement without the accountability for it. He wants to rebut the criticism, wants the satisfaction of having pushed back, but not the exposure of doing it publicly as himself. And you can understand why intellectually, but doing it publicly would invite more criticism, would create more headlines, would escalate things further. But the anonymous approach is not actually a solution to any of that. It's a way of managing the emotional discomfort without dealing with the underlying issue, which is the excessive significance that public criticism holds in his mental landscape. And in Houston, that mechanism turned from defending himself to strangers on the internet to undermining his own teammates on the internet, which is a significant and genuinely alarming escalation because, at least in 2017, the targets of his anonymous commentary were critics, were fans who were giving him grief, were external parties. In 2026, the alleged targets were Jalen Green and Alperen Sengun, people who had done nothing to him, people who were showing up every day trying to work alongside him, people who were, by any reasonable measure, on his side. What does that escalation tell us? I think it tells us that when Kevin Durant is in an environment where he feels frustrated, where the team isn't performing the way he envisioned, where his individual brilliance isn't translating to collective success in the way he expected, his instinct is to externalize the blame, to find the explanation for the disconnect that puts the problem outside of himself. And in Houston, the available targets for that externalization were his young teammates who were understandably not yet at the level of a 37-year-old Hall of Famer. And instead of doing what a real leader does, and instead of leaning in, instead of using his experience and his knowledge to genuinely help those players develop, instead of accepting that being on a rebuilding team means accepting some individual sacrifice for the collective long-term good, he allegedly went on Instagram and talked about them behind their back, like the most accomplished teenager in school history. Now, I want to address something because I know it's coming. I know some of you are watching this and thinking, okay, but where's the proof? Where's the official confirmation? This is still allegedly, and you're right to ask. You're right to apply that level of skepticism. Official confirmation on something like this is genuinely hard to come by because the nature of a burner account is that it's designed to be deniable. Durant has not officially confirmed the Houston account. His camp has not officially confirmed it. But here's what we do have. We have multiple credible NBA reporters, people with real sourcing, people with track records, people who don't put things in print without some level of substantiation, who have reported that this account was connected to Durant. We have the 2017 precedent, which is not alleged, which is confirmed, which establishes that this is something he has done before. We have the circumstantial evidence of the writing style, the insider knowledge, the specificity of the targets. We have the notably nonspecific nature of the denials that have been issued. And we have the broader context of everything we've been discussing, which makes this story fit into a pattern in a way that is, frankly, more coherent than any alternative explanation. Is it possible there's a version of this story where Durant is completely innocent and it's all a misunderstanding? Technically, yes. Is it likely, given everything we know? I'll let you make that call. What I can tell you is that the story of the Kevin Durant burner account, whether we're talking about 2017 Twitter or 2026 Instagram, is not primarily a story about social media. Social media is just the medium. The story is about a man who has spent his entire adult life being celebrated and criticized in equal measure and who has never found a healthy equilibrium with either of those things. A man who is, by most metrics, one of the most talented basketball players who has ever lived, and who somehow cannot convert that talent and that achievement into a stable, grounded sense of self that doesn't require constant external management. And I want to be clear that I'm not saying any of this with malice. This is not a KD is a bad person take. I don't know Kevin Durant. I don't know what his internal experience is like. What I'm describing are observable patterns of public behavior documented over a significant period of time that suggest someone who is struggling with something real and significant that no amount of scoring titles or championship rings has been able to address. There is actually something deeply human and recognizable about it. If you strip away the celebrity and the money and the basketball, the need for external validation, the inability to let criticism go, the reaching for proxies and surrogates to fight battles that feel too exposed to fight directly. A lot of people understand on some level what it feels like to care too much about what other people think, to spend mental energy on the opinions of people who objectively should not have the power to affect you. Kevin Durant just does it on a globally visible scale with a fake Instagram account. But understanding the human element of it doesn't mean there aren't consequences, real consequences for Jalen Green, who deserved better from his veteran teammate, for Alperen Sengun, who deserved better, for the entire Rockets organization, which made a calculated bet on Durant and got a locker room crisis in return, for the sport, which consistently has to reconcile the extraordinary level of individual talent that Kevin Durant brings with the consistent pattern of organizational chaos that seems to follow him wherever he goes. And this is the moment, this is right now in the aftermath of the Houston situation where the NBA and the broader basketball conversation has to make a choice. a choice that has been avoiding for years, because the question is not really about Kevin Durant anymore. The question is about what we as fans, as media, as an industry decide to prioritize. Do we continue to evaluate players like KD primarily through the lens of their individual brilliance, their scoring average, their highlight reel, their legacy numbers, and treat everything else as secondary, as footnotes, as stuff that happens that doesn't really affect the fundamental assessment? Or do we start taking seriously the full picture? The teammates who were allegedly undermined, the locker rooms that were damaged, the organizations that were destabilized, the young players who were supposed to be helped and were instead, by all accounts, hurt. Because here's the thing about Kevin Durant's legacy that the highlight reels don't capture. The players who share locker rooms with great leaders, the players who played with Tim Duncan, who played with LeBron in Cleveland, who play with Nikola Jokic right now, those players often describe the experience as transformative, as something that made them permanently better at basketball and better at handling pressure. That's what great leadership looks like on a basketball team. And the players who have shared locker rooms with Kevin Durant, with some exceptions, particularly from the Golden State years when everything was already perfect, describe experiences that are, shall we say, considerably more complicated. That gap matters. That gap is part of the story, and it deserves to be part of how we talk about Kevin Durant when we talk about his place in the sports history. But I also want to make sure we talk about what happens next, because the story is not over. Kevin Durant is 37 years old. He can still play. He can still score. His body is still doing things on a basketball court that very few humans on the planet are capable of doing. The question is whether there is a team, an organization, a coaching staff, a roster configuration that can work with the full Kevin Durant, the extraordinary talent, and the complicated rest of it in a way that actually produces sustained success. And honestly, I think the answer might be yes, but it requires something that Kevin Durant has never publicly demonstrated he's capable of. It requires a genuine reckoning with the pattern, not a PR statement, not a carefully worded acknowledgement of mistakes, a real look at the behavior and what drives it, and a genuine commitment to doing something different. Because here's the version of Kevin Durant that could still happen, even at 37. The version where he takes everything we've talked about tonight, the burner accounts, the locker room damage, the trail of complicated departures, and uses it as fuel for the one kind of transformation that his talent has always made possible, but his behavior has always gotten in the way of. The transformation from great individual player to great teammate, from scorer who happens to be on a team to genuine leader who makes the people around him better. From Kevin Durant, whose legacy includes asterisks, to Kevin Durant, whose final chapter is the one people remember most fondly. That version is possible. It requires accountability and self-examination and a willingness to sit with discomfort in ways that creating a fake Instagram account specifically avoids. It's hard. It's harder than scoring, but it's possible. Whether Kevin Durant chooses it is another question entirely. And based on the pattern we've walked through tonight, I would not bet heavily on it, but I am keeping my eyes open, because one of the other things about Kevin Durant that is true and that deserves acknowledgement is that he has surprised people before. He surprised people in Oklahoma City when he gave that speech about his mother at the MVP ceremony, that raw and genuine and deeply moving moment that showed a side of him that all the burner account drama makes easy to forget. He surprised people with moments of actual generosity and mentorship throughout his career that haven't gotten the same coverage as the controversies. He contains multitudes. All humans do. The Kevin Durant who allegedly created a fake Instagram account to drag his teammates is the same Kevin Durant who once made a kid in a hospital cry tears of joy by showing up unexpectedly. The same Kevin Durant who has given millions to his community and to education. The same Kevin Durant who, when he is fully locked in and committed and playing at his ceiling, is one of the most breathtaking athletes any sport has ever produced. The question is, which Kevin Durant we see more of in whatever time he has left? And the answer to that question, the real answer, not the PR answer, starts with what he does with the Houston situation. Does he genuinely address it? Does he have real conversations with Jalen Green and Sengun? Does he hold himself accountable in a way that goes beyond a statement and shows up in his actual behavior? Or does he ask for a trade, move to a new city, and begin the cycle again? The league is watching. His potential future teammates are watching. And honestly, the version of Kevin Durant that could still write a genuinely great final chapter of his career, that version is watching too, somewhere underneath all the noise and the fake accounts and the 15 years of complicated history, waiting to see if he's ready to let it out. That's the story. That is the Kevin Durant burner account story in full. every layer, every piece of context, every implication. And if I've done my job tonight, you're not just thinking about the fake Instagram anymore. You're thinking about the pattern, about what it means, about the gap between what Kevin Durant's talent has always promised and what his behavior has sometimes cost him and the people around him. If this hit different than the usual 3-minute recaps, you already know what to do. Subscribe, turn on notifications, share this with someone who needs to hear the full version of a story instead of the highlight reel, because we are just getting started with these playoffs. And there is more tea brewing right now than any single channel can cover. We are going to cover as much of it as we possibly can. Stay ready, stay subscribed, because the next episode, and I will tell you this without any exaggeration, is going to make tonight look like a warm-up. We'll see you then.